his father kept a lot of racehorses that were spiffing jumpers, and that his father would give a good tip to Brother Michael any time he wanted it, because Brother Michael was very decent and always told him the news out of the paper they got every day up in the castle. There was every kind of news in the paper: accidents, shipwrecks, sports, and politics. "Now it's all about politics in the papers," he said. "Do you people talk about that too?" "Yes," Stephen said. "Mine too," he said. Then he thought for a moment and said, "You have a queer name, Daedalus. And I have a queer name too, Attai. My name is the name of a town. Your name is like Latin." Then he asked, "Are you good at riddles?" Stephen answered, "Not very good." Then he said, "Can you answer me this one? Why is the county of Kildare like the leg of a fellow's breeches?" Stephen thought what could be the answer, and then said, "I give it up." "Because there's Attai in it," he said. "Do you see the joke? Attai is the town in County Kildare, and Attai is the other Attai." "Oh, I see," Stephen said. "That's an old riddle," he said. After a moment he said, "I say." "What?" asked Stephen. "You know," he said, "you can ask that riddle another way." "Can you?" said Stephen. "The same riddle," he said. "Do you know the other way to ask it?" "No," said Stephen. "Can you not think of the other way?" he said. He looked at Stephen over the bedclothes as he spoke. Then he lay back on the pillow and said, "There is another way, but I won't tell you what it is." Why did he not tell it? His father, who kept the racehorses, must be a magistrate too, like Soren's father and Nasty Roach's father. He thought of his own father, of how he sang songs while his mother played, and of how he always gave him a shilling when he asked for sixpence. And he felt sorry for him, that he was not a magistrate like the other boys' fathers. And why was he sent to that place with them? But his father had told him that he would be no stranger there, because his granduncle had presented an address to the Liberator there 50 years before. You could know the people of that time by their old dress. It seemed to him a solemn time, and he wondered if that was the time when the fellows in Clongowes wore blue coats with brass buttons and yellow waistcoats and caps of rabbit skin, and drank beer like grown-up people, and kept greyhounds of their own to course the hares with. He looked at the window and saw that the daylight had grown weaker. There would be cloudy grey light over the playgrounds. There was no noise on the playgrounds. The class must be doing the themes, or perhaps Father Arnell was reading out of the book. It was queer that they had not given him any medicine. Perhaps Brother Michael would bring it back when he came. They said you got stinking stuff to drink when you were in the infirmary. But he felt better now than before. It would be nice getting better slowly. You could get a book then. There was a book in the library about Holland. There were lovely foreign names in it, and pictures of strange-looking cities and ships. It made you feel so happy. How pale the light was at the window. But that was nice. The fire rose and fell on the wall. It was like waves. Someone had put coal on, and he heard voices. They were talking. It was like the noise of the waves. Or the waves were talking among themselves as they rose and fell. He saw the sea of waves. Long, dark waves were rising and falling, dark under the moonless night. A tiny light twinkled at the pierhead where the ship was entering, and he saw a multitude of people gathered by the water's edge to see the ship that was entering their harbor. A tall man stood on the deck, looking out towards the flat, dark land, and by the light at the pierhead he saw his face, the sorrowful face of Brother Michael. He saw him lift his hand towards the people, and heard him say in a loud voice of sorrow over the waters, "He is dead! We saw him lying upon the catafalque." A wail of sorrow went up from the people. "Parnell! Parnell! He is dead!" They fell upon their knees, moaning in sorrow. And he saw Dante in a maroon velvet dress, and with a green velvet mantle hanging from her shoulders, walking proudly and silently past the people who knelt by the water's edge. A great fire, banked high and red, flamed in the grate, and under the ivy-twined branches of the chandelier, the Christmas table was spread. They had come home a little late, and still dinner was not ready, but it would be ready in a jiffy, his mother had said. They were waiting for the door to open, and for the servants to come in, holding the big dishes covered with their heavy metal covers. All were waiting. Uncle Uncle Charles, who sat far away in the shadow of the window, Dante and Mr. Casey, who sat in the easy chairs at either side of the hearth, Stephen, seated on a chair between them, his feet resting on the toasted boss. Mr. Dedalus looked at himself in the pier glass above the mantelpiece, waxed out his moustache ends, and then, parting his coat-tails, stood with his back to the glowing fire. And still from time to time, he withdrew a hand from his coat-tail to wax out one of his moustache ends. Mr. Casey leaned his head to one side, and smiling, tapped the gland of his neck with his fingers. And Stephen smiled too, for he knew now that it was not true that Mr. Casey had a purse of silver in his throat. He smiled to think how the silvery noise which Mr. Casey used to make had deceived him. And when he had tried to open Mr. Casey's hand to see if the purse of silver was hidden there, he had seen that the fingers could not be straightened out. And Mr. Casey had told him that he had got those 3 cramped fingers making a birthday present for Queen Victoria. Mr. Casey tapped the gland of his neck and smiled at Stephen with sleepy eyes. And Mr. Dedalus said to him,
"Yes. Well, no, that's all right. Oh, we had a good walk, hadn't we, John? Yes. I wonder if there's any likelihood of dinner this evening? Yes. Oh, well, now, we got a good breath of ozone round the head today. Aye, bedad."
He turned to Dante and said,
"You didn't stir out at all, Mrs. Reardon?"
Dante frowned and said shortly, "No."